Harry Potter is a lot of things when we first meet him in the second chapter of Philosopher's Stone. He's sassy, he's kind, and he's living in a broom cupboard. But I think the one thing that defines him the most in the second chapter of the book, and the one that the second chapter of the book is really trying to hammer into the head of the reader, is that Harry is resilient. He's so resilient, in fact, that even his hair grows out of resilience. Now, I think this is something that I kind of notice every single time that I read Harry Potter, but especially this time, maybe like the 20th time that I'm reading it. And just an FYI, I am reading through this and planning to kind of write a ton of essays on my thoughts as I read through it for the 20th time. So I would love if some of you all actually want to follow with me and let me know what you think of these essays and just kind of what you got out of the chapters as you read them. This channel also does some of the same thing with Lord of the Rings, although it's my first time reading Lord of the Rings, and Brandon Sanderson, and we'll soon do some other books like Game of Thrones, some Stephen King work, for you, Ryan, Dune, Narnia, and just some other really good books out there. So make sure you subscribe and like the video as well. But I think from the very first moment that we meet Harry in the second chapter, we kind of just see his resilience bubble up. Because the first paragraph of this chapter paints a very bleak picture. This is what the book says. Nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on the front step. But Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. It crept into their living room, which was almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when Mr. Dursley had seen the fateful news report about the owls. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball wearing different colored bobble hats. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby. And now the photograph showed a large blond boy riding his first bicycle on a roundabout at the fair, playing a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room held no sign at all that another boy lived in the house too. Now, Dumbledore says a line later in this book when Harry is sneaking around in his invisibility cloak. He says, "I don't need a cloak to become invisible." But I think Harry can actually say the same thing here. This whole chapter, he is treated as if he weren't even there. He has no pictures of himself on the wall. He's ignored unless he is of use to any of them as a servant. And when there's actually a moment when his aunt and uncle talk in front of him and they completely ignore him. It's actually a devastating line in the book that is from the perspective of Harry and how Harry perceives it. The book says this: "The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather, as though he was something very nasty that couldn't understand them. Like a slug." And not only is Harry invisible, but his past is invisible as well. So he really doesn't even know where he came from. He's not even allowed to ask questions. The Dursleys just kind of give him blank answers for how his parents died, and there aren't even any pictures of his parents in the house. This whole setting is just so bleak for Harry. It's as if the Dursleys are trying to erase both Harry and his parents from the world simply by ignoring them and acting like they don't exist. And not only that, but Harry being treated like an invisible slug, he now has to see his cousin being treated like the King of England. He had 37 presents from his parents, and the weasel himself actually got him 2 more because they didn't have as many as last year. He knows how to manipulate his parents perfectly, and Harry just has to sit there and wolf down his bacon faster because he sees a Dudley tantrum coming. And as a side note, I actually think it's a fascinating deep dive into parenting as well, in that giving your kid everything they want is actually more harmful to them. Actually more harmful in Dumbledore's perspective and in Dumbledore's estimation than the things that Harry went through. Because later in the series, Dumbledore will confront the Dursleys and he will say, "You did not do as I asked. You have never treated Harry as a son. He has known nothing but neglect and often cruelty at your hands. The best that can be said is that he has at least escaped the appalling damage you have inflicted upon the unfortunate boy sitting between you," namely Dudley. Obviously, the answer isn't treating your child like they are invisible like they do Harry, but giving them everything they want is also something that can cause irreparable damage to them. But through this neglect and abuse that Harry has to deal with, Think about the insane doubt and insecurity that Harry must have to deal with on a daily basis about what he did to deserve this. He's just so resilient. And it's a beautiful thing. And he hasn't lost his charm or sassiness either. This is something that I think most people who are reading it for the first time see when they meet Harry. They always talk about he's just so much sassier than the movie Harry. And he has such a better sense of humor. I love when he describes as Dudley being a pig in a wig. And Harry's resilience doesn't just appear in his good attitude, though that is nothing short of remarkable, to be honest. It appears in his very body. His hair becomes a symbol of his resistance. The chapter mentions his hair 3 times. This is what the book says about the first instance that it's mentioned. Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen as Harry was turning over the bacon. "Comb your hair," he barked, by way of morning greeting. About once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of his newspaper and shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together. But it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. I think that this is the magic that's in Harry resisting the neglect and abuse that he's dealing with at the hands of the Dursleys. And in one of the instances where he actually is talking about the strange things happening to him, one of them is involving his hair growing back. This is what the book says. "The problem was, strange things often happened around Harry, and it was just no good telling the Dursleys he didn't make them happen. Once, Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barber, looking as though he hadn't been there at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short he was almost bald except for his fringe, which she left to hide that horrible scar." Dudley had laughed himself silly at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he was already laughed at for his baggy clothes and sellotape glasses. Next morning, however, he had got up to find his hair exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. He had been given a week in his cupboard for this, even though he had tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. Harry's hair is the symbol of his resistance. I'm actually a bit curious to keep reading this as well, just to see if this theme pops up anymore. And I think it's also interesting that I think in the 2 people that we know of in this series who we've heard their origin for magic, Harry in the stories that he tells here, and in Neville and his uncle pushing him out of a window and his magic materializing and bouncing him back up, both are formed as a kind of resistance. I think I would really be interested to see how magic shows up in some of the other students at Hogwarts too. Like, it can't all be out of resistance, right? It makes me very curious how else it would come up. Perhaps maybe from deep joy or sadness or contentment maybe. But the fact that Harry and Neville are both Gryffindors and both had their magic show up because the magic was keeping them alive and resisting the abuse that they were receiving is a really cool idea, I think. The magic was really keeping them safe. And let me know in the comments how you think magic materializes in students. I'm really curious about that. But I think every time I read this story, I'm astounded all over again at the resilience of Harry in the beginning of the story. He hasn't come out of the situation unharmed by any stretch, but he's still good and funny and kind. He even says this about the boa constrictor. Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself. No company except stupid people drumming their fingers on the glass trying to disturb it all day long. It was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on the door to wake you up. At least, he got to visit the rest of the house. He has compassion on this creature, thinking that his situation is worse than Harry's. To be that kind and to have this kind of neglect that Harry is under and to still think of others and to be selfless and to look at this snake with pity and compassion is a perfect starting point to a story. Because this is a hero that, yes, goes through a hero's journey and goes through a transformation, but is good and kind and compassionate already from the start. It's just in his very blood. Just like the curse is in his blood. So his good character. And it makes Harry a character who is immediately likable. And it's so good. But that's all I got for today. Make sure you subscribe and like the video, and I will see you in the next one.